cool. Hafsa and Davi are jumping on. Cool. Well, I will turn it over to Jake for Think Tank.
Morning, everybody. So I wanted to call something out for this think tank that we've heard a lot in a couple different venues. We've heard it with Kristen. We've heard it with within Slack, and I just thought it would be a good point to kind of pause and reflect on this. A lot of you have expressed kind of these ideas of like compassion fatigue and having like doing all this work with empathy and embedding empathy in your practices and like working and connecting constantly with those students. And I know that it can be like really a big ask for you emotionally, and like it can have a lot of symptoms and effects. So I think that this is a good point to kind of call out and get a general understanding of that for this think tank, and then discuss kind of what you're feeling, what you're doing, and then what kind of methods and tools you're using to manage, to cope with, or even like hopefully prevent in some cases that compassion fatigue. So I'm going to drop into Slack, hopefully, a document that is called Running on Empty. It's written by a compassion fatigue specialist who works in the health sector. So not exactly like related 100% to what we do, but I think there's a lot of overlap in the work that you're doing and kind of these emotions and that empathy part that you're feeling, right? So let me drop it in there if I can. Okay. So it's called Running on Empty. Just dropped it there. The idea would be to take about 2 or 3 minutes to kind of skim through it. There's a lot to take away from it, so I don't expect you to really get 100% of the content there right now, but maybe take a few minutes, 2 to 3 minutes to review that, to take out some ideas that you think are important for your practice, things that you might think are important for your peers as well. So yeah, take 2 to 3 minutes, and then we'll send you into breakout rooms where you can discuss this article. The idea is that you get those kind of bases for what compassion fatigue is. We're all on the same playing field there. And then I have some think tank questions for you as well. So once you're into those groups, again in Slack, I'm dropping the think tank questions that should help kind of help you think through a lot of these things you're experiencing, but hopefully also come up with some tools or strategies, or even just ideate with your peers about like, what do you do? What can I do? What works for me? And how am I gonna like keep my cup full? You know, it's hard work we're doing, so acknowledging that and looking at what you're doing on a personal level, what we can do on an organizational level as well. So has everybody seen those 2 documents in there? Yeah. Great. So take about 2 or 3 minutes, and then Grace will send you into the breakout rooms in a minute here. Okay, sound good? All righty.
Feel free to turn off cameras while you're reading if that's what you want to do.
Welcome back, everyone. Hope that was like a good discussion. I know that probably not enough time to get through all those questions or all of your concerns, and certainly not something that you're going to be able to change just based on this conversation. It's practice, and it takes time, and it takes a lot of investment, and intentionality about what we're doing. That said, is there anything you'd like to share maybe a question or concern or something that you just wanted to share with the group? I'll just turn it over to you coaches to take this time for a whole group discussion here.
In our group for a while, we just like complained, and I think like we looked at the questions and we were kind of answering them in like a roundabout way just through discussion, and we ended up hitting most of the points, I think. But it felt good to complain. I've always like been a strong believer in the power of complaint, and that like sometimes you need to complain in order to like do your job well, and that's how I cope with a lot of things. So it felt good to like complain about my students that I love dearly but like cause me some inconveniences sometimes, and it felt good to like hear that other coaches are going through the same thing, and it's not just me that has difficult students, and it's not just me that is worried about like whether or not I'm doing a good enough job. So yeah, I don't know. I enjoyed that. I think it was helpful.
Hello, good morning. What are we talking about?
Yeah, we just Denisha, were you in a breakout room or did you just okay. So
I
we
just
had
joined. Okay.
we had a little conversation in our breakout rooms about compassion fatigue. There are some articles in Slack if you want to look at those. And then now we're just having a whole group discussion around those. So anybody else want to voice anything that you'd like to voice, or questions that you still have?
I didn't talk about this in the group, but we've been doing a lot of sessions on like reflection and compassion and transparency and empathy. And like, honestly, because I am the person who's like from the start been trying to normalize. Sorry, I can hear myself through Daniel's computer. I like need to shut it off. It's bugging me.
Sorry, Marcella, we can't hear you. It's for some reason here.
How about now? Awesome. Okay, sorry. Kind of all building on that beginning part of what we've been talking about in trainings and reflecting on and doing think tanks. For me, because I am somebody who like in just being the person that I am, I'm very vocal about how things tire me, like how I never knew there was like the word compassion fatigue, but I talk about it, like I explain it a lot, and how like we are a support service. We're like our student life on campus. Like that is exhausting work because of this. And I talk about this to my coworkers, my supervisors, talk about this at my other job. I talk about this with my partner. Like I talk about it all the time. And it becomes exhausting when like I feel like when I have to talk about it like at a meta level, it is exhausting too because I have to relive it. Like Salesforce is exhausting because I have to relive the interactions that I had to have with students to record it. Like it's like a compounding exhaustion. And I have a lot of precautions. Like I take care of myself a lot. I do a lot of stuff during the day, during the week, off hours to take care of myself. And I've had to do that because I am the very, very intensely compassionate person that I am, that in my relationships, I always like give so much more than I'm able than I take from other people. But it's, for me, it's really exhausting to reflect on things like empathy and transparency and fatigue because I'm consistently complaining and like talking about that. But I realize that like that's not a critique of this like whole thing. It's just that like sometimes I literally have to shut down during training just so I am able to like, because I'm like, I do this work all the time. Like it is my like it's me practicing self-care in training when I like turn my screen off or like literally have to step away for a while because I'm like, I don't need this level of reflection at this point because this is a reflection I'm doing all the time.
Thanks for calling that out, Marcel. I think it is important to state that. I know we all learn differently, and hopefully, that the spaces that we're giving you are time that serves most of it. But I mean, I understand when there's a challenge, like it's something that I do all the time, and it can be exhausting for sure. Unless there are any other ideas or questions, I just wanted to kind of wrap up by saying, this is something that you're all experiencing. I hope it's been clear and been normalized a little bit more, that this is something that's not unique to your situation. And just recognize that there might be individual things that you can do, but also organizational strategies that can be implemented. So a good way if you're experiencing any of this compassion fatigue. And Anahita, thank you so much for sharing that the self-check, the self-assessment. If you're high or low in any of those areas and you take time to do that, please connect with your coach supervisor, connect with your PA, connect with us here. Let us know. There may be some things we can do to help. And there may be a lot of other things already built into the system. So one thing I'd like to call out too, you probably got an email last week about the EAP, the Employee Assistance Program, and the MAP, the Member Assistance Program. So just calling those out. Those are services you can use right now. I think that EAP has 5 free in-person counseling sessions. So if that's something that you think would be beneficial, start to lean on it. I know that in a lot of my jobs, this is not something that I've had. So really, I think taking full advantage of those services would be a good opportunity for all of you. Yeah. And unless
I did want to add something. So again, thank you, Marcella, for calling out like why you're on mute, and I appreciate the College Possible staff for not questioning or making you be on screen, because as you all can see, I haven't been on screen, and it's partly because things have just been really draining, as I'm sure everyone have already stated. And sometimes I just need to, well, most times I should say, I need to step away, and I'm either writing or drawing, and I would rather you all not think I'm paying attention, so I just hide my face. But again, I do thank you all for respecting that. And I did want to say, I actually attended a self-care workshop on Thursday, I believe, sometime last week. And one of the things that they challenged us to do, so they gave us a piece of chocolate and they tortured us by telling us not to eat it just yet. But they told us, like, take into consideration what the paper feels like and what it sounds like. And then we put it in our mouth, and then they said, okay, don't chew it, but just let it sit there and just think of what's happening to your body, what's happening to your mind. What does it taste like? Is it melting? Is it, not, or something like that? But the point of the activity was just to debrief, even when you're eating, just thinking about when you're eating, what you're eating, and how it's making you feel, and how calming it can be. And it actually was, because it just allowed you to let go and relax and really just think, versus, okay, I have to shove all this down my throat before I have to meet with somebody else. So yeah, I think that's all I wanted to say, and thank you again.
Thanks so much for sharing that, Denisha. Those mindful practices can be like really powerful, I think, if you can start to implement those. And unless there are any other questions or concerns, I would encourage you again to reach out. If this is not the forum that you feel most comfortable sharing those, reach out on an individual basis. Don't let these kind of concerns that you have go unattended to. Let us know in some way, or whoever you feel comfortable reaching out to, okay? And with that said, I'll turn it over to Grace here.
We are going into a break now, so take 15 minutes for yourselves and be back here at 10:15 or 11:15 for Cincy folks, and we'll be going through a couple Salesforce things and some updates.
Hi, everybody. Seeing a few people start to pop back in. We're at 1:15, so please do the same if you haven't already, or let me know that you're back in the chat. Either way is fine. But once I see that we have the group back, we'll get started with our next updates. All right, so seeing those who are on camera is helpful. Thanks for the comments in the chat, Elsa and Dow and Alex, now that you're back. And so I imagine we might have a couple people on the way back too. But we can go ahead and move into the updates that we have. You'd see on the agenda, there are two pieces here that I'd be giving voice to today. The first one you'll see listed as member impact and member experience stories. So that's something that I'll be giving voice to here first. And I have a couple slides just to walk through visually with you, so that it's not just me talking at you all by myself. Let me try and share my screen for the PowerPoint half. All right, everyone able to see my screen? Thumbs up. Great, thanks. Okay, so member impact, member experience stories. Want to provide some context on what are these words, what do they mean together in this context? And so that's what I'll walk through here with you to start off. So member impact stories. The idea here is that there's stories that communicate the value that AmeriCorps members like yourselves contribute through your service. Most frequently, these kind of stories, the member impact stories specifically, focus on a student who benefited from coaching. One of the main purposes of these stories as well is to help garner ongoing support for AmeriCorps throughout the country. It also helps make sure that College Possible is meeting the grant requirements that we're accountable for the various national grant funders that support the work that we do, the support that you provide to students. So that's kind of the high level context about what a member impact story is. I could imagine that hearing this description, your mind could go one way or another as you might start to reflect on your own examples that you may have to write about or to speak to. I thought it would be helpful to provide an example of one that has come in the past from a coach. And so I have one here for you, just as soon as I click the right button. There we go. Okay. So I'm going to ask for a volunteer who wants to be our reader for this member impact story, please. Who is ready to step up and read this story for us?
Word of mouth brought college student Aaron to an on-campus College Possible coach. He was struggling in one class in particular and wasn't sure where to go for help. For low-income students, one class failed can mean loss of scholarships, financial aid, and in some instances can derail their journey to graduation. The College Possible coach was able to arrange tutoring, and when Aaron raised his test score from a 3% to a 90%, his coach was able to facilitate a meeting with the professor to allow Aaron to retake the first test. Aaron has consistently applied himself and received an A for the semester.
Awesome. Thank you very much, Alana. I appreciate you stepping up. So as you can see from reading this yourself or hearing it, this is a story about a student, in this case referred to as Aaron, who has done a lot of great work making progress with his academics, and a lot of that came from collaborating with the coach. And so being able to share that story helps to illustrate for those who might not otherwise have a window into the experience that you have with your students, the kind of impact that coaches can have with their students. So that's the member impact story. I also want to make sure we give voice to the member experience story. So here's some of the context around member experience story. So this one communicates the value that AmeriCorps service has for the coach themselves, ways that it can impact you as a service member yourself. Most frequently, I'd say these stories focus on growth or inspiration that a coach experiences through their service. And similar to the member impact stories, these do also help garner ongoing support for AmeriCorps, and they also are something that help us meet the grant requirements that College Possible is accountable for. So similar to the member impact story, I want to provide an example. So I have one of those here, and I will be looking for a volunteer to read this one for us. So who is ready to step up and read our member experience story?
My time at College Possible would not have been half as much fun or quite so rewarding without the people who shared every aspect of the job with me. It has been my pleasure to serve with these amazing humans. You would be hard pressed to find another group of people who care as much about the success of their students. They have opened my eyes to new perspectives, challenged the way I think, and encouraged me to be a more pure version of myself. I am thankful for such a great group of people to complain to, cry to, talk smack with, and celebrate with throughout these 2 years.
Awesome. Thank you, Kirsha. So as you can see from this story, this one is very much focused on the writer. It's focused on the coach themselves and what their experience has been connecting with their colleagues, with their fellow coaches, and how that's benefited them. And you'll see that there are a couple places here where ellipses are included, where acknowledging that there is more here. This was a longer story and wanted to highlight some of the key parts that could illustrate some of what this example might contribute. The length of these stories can certainly vary, though, depending on how much one has to reflect on. Okay, so kind of provide some context on the two different kinds of stories, looked at an example of each one. Also want to make sure that we're spending some time talking about some best practices. There are a couple things I'll call out here, but then I'll also then be asking for a returner's perspective with writing stories like this in the past, and also in case it helps to connect any dots in the minds of our returner friends. Previously, these stories that we're now calling member impact, member experience stories, we refer to as great stories. So if that's a thing you feel like you've heard of, but these are not, those would be connecting some dots. So the first piece I wanted to call out is keeping anonymity in mind. As is probably clear in these examples, especially the member impact story, what you're writing about is a student situation. And we want to make sure that we're being mindful of any sensitive information that would be represented in that story. And so one of the things that we encourage people to do when working on writing these down is to either use a pseudonym, a different name for the student, or just a first name. So it's not something that is identifying the student and their experience. Certainly if it's something that's a very sensitive situation, but even if it's not particularly sensitive, it's still a best practice to keep that anonymity a part of the way that you're approaching writing these stories. And then the other best practice that I would recommend is to write what resonates with you. That won't be the same for each of you. You all might go in very different directions about what kind of student situation really resonates with you that you would want to help to illustrate for others who are supporting this work but are farther removed from the direct student engagements, to be able to illustrate for them what is it that really resonates about this coaching experience between you and your students, or for the member experience story, what really resonates for you that you're taking away from this coaching, this service experience. So those are my two best practices I wanted to call out. And as I said, I want to open it up for any of our returners who have written stories like these in the past about any recommendations or things that have helped you, at least as an individual, even if you don't want to speak for others beyond yourself.
Okay, I can share a story, I think. Yeah, I guess I have this Oh, okay. I have so many stories going around in my head, but I guess the one where I had a student who like struggled with a lot of like anxiety and depression, and because his like family didn't really acknowledge mental health as an issue in his household, he didn't really know about the resources on campus. So it was cool to be able to connect him to the class office on our campus, which is for like people who need academic support, for people who have different levels of abilities or disabilities. And then it was cool to connect him to a counselor, and now like I'm able to talk to the counselor and like talk about the student, so that now he has like so many people kind of on his little team at Augsburg. But it was cool to support him in creating that team, and now see him being really like self-sufficient now. So yeah, no, it's kind of haphazard, but yeah.
That's great. No, thank you, Alana. That's a great story, and it's really representative of the kinds of connections that you as a coach and you as coaches can have for your students. As you said, helping them find their support team. Certainly you're there in their corner, but it's not just you as the coach. So that's awesome. So I will give it another moment in case anyone else really wants to jump in with another perspective there. But otherwise, I'll have us move along then. All right, so the next piece that I wanted to look at is a timeline for writing these stories. So we'll need to ask for one member impact and one member experience story from each coach 3 times throughout the year. We're approaching our first timeline that would be the end of November. So specifically, we're asking that your first one of each of these 2 stories would be completed by Wednesday, November 28th. The process, I forgot to include that here on the slide, but for submitting them would be to email those to both your program advisor and your supervisor. Your supervisors are in the loop about this process, as well as your program advisors, and both would be those to send the story to. And then the other piece that you'll see called out here, this is certainly something that you're welcome to take additional time beyond Ducks Today. In fact, knowing that everyone has different styles of in what spaces you like to reflect. I know we heard about that earlier, or in what spaces you would want to have some focused writing. We wanted to provide a couple options. So certainly you can do that on your own time outside of Ducks Today, but we also wanted to provide a few minutes here so that if you're ready to start brainstorming or to start writing down some ideas, that this is something that you'd be able to accomplish perhaps right here, right now. Don't feel too much pressure to do it right here, right now, though, if that's not the right fit for you. So we'll have time for that in just a moment or two. But I did want to make sure to check if there are any questions about this. I'm going to stop sharing my screen so I can see more faces, or the chat box as well. So any questions about member impact or member experience stories?
Yeah, I have a question. The link you just saw, is that about what you're looking for?
Yeah, great question. That is about the length that would be a good fit. If you are compelled to write something more than that, that's great. But the length that you just saw for a couple examples should be just fine. Thanks for asking. Any other questions out there before we might turn it over to some brainstorming or writing time? Okay, seeing none, hearing none. I think what we will do is for these next 15 minutes, so that's until 10:45 Central or 11:45 Eastern, we will consider this brainstorming time or writing time, or if you want to choose to do that later on your own time, this could be a break for you. So in either case, we'll spend these next 15 minutes. And if you have any questions that come up in the process, let me know. Otherwise, I hope it's helpful for you to start thinking perhaps about what kind of stories for yourself or to help illustrate the experience of your students that you would want to write down. All right, thanks. We will reconvene in 15 minutes. All right, looks like we are at 10:45 Central, that is. So if you could turn your cameras back on, let me know you're here, or drop a message in the chat to let me know that you're here. That would be great. All right. Thanks for those messages I'm seeing come in, and for those of you on camera as well. I hope that that time was helpful to you. If you chose to use that for brainstorming and writing, hope it was productive. Otherwise, if it was more of a decompressed time for you, I hope that was helpful too. I want to shift gears to the other update that you see listed on the agenda, and that is about Salesforce dashboard additions. So throughout the year, there's certainly this core content that's already on the dashboards that we started the year with. But as we go throughout the year, there might be some additional timely items that we would be adding into dashboards, and we're at one of those times. And so we wanted to make sure to call that out so it's on your radar. You may have already noticed this yourself from reviewing your own dashboard, but just wanted to make sure we gave voice to it here in Dux today too. All right, so I'm going to share my screen as I have Salesforce open here. All right, so I am looking at what I have for a catalyzed progress report. This is one of the views that I have that includes all of the campuses. I know that each of you would be viewing just your own campus team, but we have the same graphs, the same elements of the dashboard represented. So we have all the same content that was already included that you'd be well familiar with, but I want to scroll down towards the bottom to, I believe, the three new sections that have been added in. So you'd already be familiar with this pie chart in a way of financial aid renewal as one of the key milestones your students are completing this time of year. You'd also be familiar with the persistence category report. But over here on the right, this is our first new chart that we have. And this is for spring registration for students completing spring registration milestone. So it looks very similar to the financial aid renewal milestone, but now we're able to start reporting out on spring registration progress for your students. I know that each of your schools are on different timelines for exactly when that spring registration window opens, but I know that for many schools that is either open now or will be very soon. So happy to have that reflected in the dashboard as a way for you and your supervisors to keep track along with you of how your students are progressing with that. And then the other piece with two charts related to it has to do with our support of unenrolled students. So many of you, but not all, include some unenrolled students in your portfolios. Certainly there are more in our Minnesota schools with students who have been in the program longer. It's understandable that there would be a larger portion of students who might be stopped out of school right now. But some of our schools in Ohio and Iowa also have some students who are currently unenrolled. And so this first graph that we have on unenrolled is Catalyze Unenrolled Plan Update. And so this is where on the right you can see the different unenrolled plan categories. If it's a re-enrolling student, a striver, a searcher, or does not intend to enroll, or unknown. And so just a high level way to be able to view of your unenrolled students, if you have them, which way you have them categorized for the time being to help inform your support of those students. And then the other piece, since all of the activity tracking that we have in the above sections of the dashboard focus on our enrolled students, we also want to make sure that we have a dedicated place to be focusing on the activities, both the attempted outreach as well as the successful contacts that you've had with your unenrolled students. And so that's called out here, again, in that stacked bar chart where blue are the activities that are successful two-way contact, the green are the attempted, and yellow if there is no response required. So hopefully another window for you as well as your team with your supervisor too, to keep an eye on the support that we're providing to our unenrolled students in addition to all the good content on the dashboard for keeping our eyes on our enrolled students too. So I wanted to make sure to give voice to that here briefly today, and also briefly, since spring registration is something that we have as a relatively new addition to Salesforce for this time of year, I also just wanted to provide a quick reminder of where to go to update the spring registration milestone and how to do that. So I have a student called up here, St. Cloud student, and let's see, I'll just click over there. All right, and so for our student here, on the related list of quick links, I go to milestones here on the right. And if I select milestones, It'll show all the milestones for financial aid renewal and registration for different semesters that are on record for this student. And we would be looking at the 2018-2019 spring registration. So we'd click into that particular milestone. And then for this milestone, what we'd be looking at specifically is milestone status here on the left. If we click the edit icon and then click into the drop-down menu, we'd have not started. If you and a student have not engaged on this topic at all yet, and a student hasn't begun the process, we'd have in progress if the student has talked to you about their plans for registering, but they haven't been able to yet. Completed, hopefully that one's straightforward, that they have completed their process for registering for next semester. Did not complete would be the situation that we know a student for sure is not going to be registering for next semester for one reason or another. And then NA will graduate, very similar to the financial aid renewal. This would be that if we know a student's going to graduate and they wouldn't need to register for next semester because of that, then we would identify them as such here in this milestone. I would not anticipate that you have very many students who are graduating before next spring. As most students, we do tend to see graduating after the spring semester, but that is one of the fields there. And then the other one I would call out in particular is the date completed, where you'd be able to record the date when the student completed their registration. And then a place for notes as well. So in particular, if this is something that there's extra context that you want to be able to remind yourself of, including that in the notes would be appropriate. So very quick, just a reminder of that process, as I know it's something that you'd be well familiar with already for updating milestones for financial aid in particular, but just thought it might be worth a quick glance there. Any questions from any of what I walked through before we shift to the next part of our agenda today? Okay, seeing none, hearing none, I will turn it over to Grace and Davi, who are going to take us through the next part of today's agenda. Thanks.
Hello. So I have had 3 cups of coffee today, and no one has ever been more hyped to talk about writing letters of recommendation than I am right now. So let's get to it. I want to start off by getting a feel for where you're all at in terms of like experience with writing letters of recommendation and level of confidence, because I know some of you have written them before and some of you have not. So I don't want to talk your ears off if you're all like, yeah, Grace, we got it. We don't need your help. We know how to write them. But I anticipate that some of you haven't written one yet. So if you could grab the like annotate feature toolbar thing at the top of your screen and put your arrow or your name in one of these 2 boxes. Yes, I've written a letter of recommendation before, or no, not yet. Thanks, Anahita. Thanks, Nia. Thanks, Jenny. Thanks, Alex. Thanks, Sharky. Thanks, Scribble. Nice, Allison. Cool, cool. Thanks, Daniel. Okay, so seeing a lot of first-year coaches on that right-hand side, which is great, because that tells me that this is going to be a good use of time. Okay, cool, cool. So I still see a few names. Perfect. Now I am going to delete all of your annotations. I delete all of them at once because I'm going to ask you another question. Beautiful. So scrolling down to the next one, on a scale from 1 to, oh, I moved it. On a scale from 1 to 5, how confident do you feel about your ability to write a good letter of recommendation for a student? So go ahead and put yourself somewhere on this spectrum. Again, name or your arrow is probably quicker. All right, solid 4. Towards the middle. Oh no, we can only do 1 arrow at a time, so they're going to jump around. That's fine. Either one works. That is good to know, though. Who gets to claim the arrow? Okay, so we're all over the board. Good. And now I'm going to erase them again and ask you one more question. trash can, clear. Thank you so much, Jake. I knew there was a button that did it all at once. Okay, and last question, sort of shifting gears a little bit. On a scale from 1 to 5, how confident did you feel as an undergrad asking someone for a letter of recommendation? So putting yourself in the shoes of your students right now. Yeah, I was definitely over to the left on this one. Cool, cool, cool. Okay, Denisha, I see you. Towards the middle, okay. And Sharky, we got some confident social people over there on the right. Yeah, Kersha. Okay, so I am going to stop that for a moment. So thank you for helping me get a better understanding of where you all are at. So my goals for this time is 1, to give y'all some best practices for writing letters of recommendation. Davi is going to share, or already has shared in Slack, a sample letter of recommendation that she's written for a student last year, and she'll share some best practices in her experience in writing letters of rec for her students last year. And then I also want to spend a little bit of time talking about how you all can empower students to ask for letters of recommendation, whether that's from you or for professors or from bosses or other humans in their life who might be well equipped to write those. And talking through some like etiquette around asking for letters of rec, so that you all have those in your back pocket to share with students. So let's get started. First, I want to hand it over to Davi. In Slack, she shared a letter of recommendation that she's written, and I'm going to screen share that, but you can also pull it up and scroll through it in Slack if that's easier for you. And she also was kind enough to answer some questions that I had and that I thought maybe you all might have about her experience last year as a coach in writing some of these letters. So I am going to ask Davi to give voice to some of these questions and answers. And I'd love for you all to, as she's talking through that, keep in mind any questions in addition to these that you might have for her, in terms of what you should expect upcoming in writing letters of recommendation. So Davi, can you give voice to some of the questions and answers here that you were kind enough to write out?
Awesome. Can you hear me? All right. Yeah, so last year I wrote quite a few letters of recommendations for students. Most of them were for scholarships, but a few of them were for internship opportunities for my students. And typically, depending on the student and how well I know them, I usually like to block off 1 to 2 hours to work on each one. And the reason I block off so much time for each is that I think it's important to make sure that every recommendation is unique. So I don't typically work from any sort of template, just because that allows me to be a little freer with how I'm writing, and to make sure that I'm not putting out something super generic. Because when you think about how many recommendations people are reading for scholarships or internships, I try to make sure that there are things in each one that stand out about the student. So some of my main tips: don't wait till the last moment, but also be really intentional with your wording while being honest. You don't want to say every single one of your students is your best student, right? Because that, while we might feel that way, isn't necessarily true, right? And ask questions of the student, and be honest with them if you need more information to go off of, or if you can't do the recommendation, which is sort of an uncomfortable conversation to have with the student, but sometimes either you don't have the time or you don't know the student well enough and they haven't provided you with enough information to be able to write them a strong recommendation. And my thought process is, if you can't write a strong recommendation, then don't write one. And that's kind of a personal thing, I guess, but and then moving into actually writing the recommendation, let the reader know like why what you are saying matters. So let them know a little bit about yourself, what you do on campus, what your connection is to students, and also what you've seen of your student to make them a good fit for whatever you're recommending them for, and give specific examples. And then moving into that last question, how do you write a letter for a non-flagship student that you've only met once or twice? If it's not their first semester, chances are they'll have some sort of information in Salesforce, which is a great resource. Otherwise, whether I have known the student really well or not, I always ask for a resume. I also ask to see their essay for whatever they're applying to, so that some of what I'm saying at least is sort of going hand in hand with what they're saying in their own essay. And then I try to sit down with them and just talk about their history, their goals, and just to get a better picture of who they are in general, so that when I'm writing about them, I can sort of paint a picture of their personality as well.
That was really helpful. Thank you, Davi. Does anyone else have questions outside of the ones that Davi's already touched on? Best practices, her experience, questions that you feel like you might run into as you start to write letters for students?
Can I ask a question to the group? Has anybody written a letter for, like Davi mentioned, or like has anybody had an experience where they have to say no to somebody, or like have written one where they don't know what to write? Or I'm just curious if anybody's experienced that.
I don't think I've written like a formal letter, but the first time one of my students had asked me, like, because we had a prior working relationship. So like, although it's her first year as CP, but I knew her before CP. And so she had asked me, and it wasn't like a letter, it was one of those questionnaire kind of things where you have to answer as the recommender or whatever, those kind of questions. And so like when she first asked, I was like, I don't know what I'm supposed to write. Like I know what the questions are and like I could answer them, but I was just like, I don't know if I'm supposed to use like specific words or terminology to describe this student and how effective or whatnot, because it was like, I don't know, like I could tell that they wanted efficient like answers, and then but also testing her kind of personality and how she works with people. And so I was just like, I don't know if this is even what I'm supposed to do, but I'm going to do it because I know I'm very confident. I feel like confident about the student and recommending that student. So I was fine with answering it, but I was just like, I don't know. But it worked out because she ended up getting it. So that was great.
The letter that I'm writing right now is kind of weird because I know the student very well, but she's applying for an IT internship and I know nothing about IT. I cannot speak at all about whether or not she's like good at coding or anything. So the letter honestly feels a little bit more like a character witness type thing where I'm like, oh, she's very responsible and, is very attentive. But, like I did tell her that, like, I don't know anything about IT and she still wanted me to write it. So yeah, writing this letter has been interesting.
Do you know, Allison, if they asked someone else to write one in addition to you? Like a professor who knows about those things.
Yes, I did ask about that, and she said that she needed 2, and one of them is one of her professors.
Good.
So at least one person can attest to whether or not she's actually good at IT. So yeah, this letter reads, like I said, it's a little bit more like a character witness where I'm just talking about what a great student she is and how responsible she is. So yeah.
That actually sounds super appropriate then. That seems like something you could speak to pretty well. Sorry, Jenny, I think you were going to say something and then I jumped in.
Oh, I was just going to say that I'm also writing one right now. And I've written about a handful already, so I feel pretty good about writing them. Also because the students who ask me are students who are very consistent and meet with me, so I know them pretty well, and most of them are friends from when I was a student, so I can speak on their character and also their academics and everything else. So I'm writing one right now for a friend who I met when I was a student, so I've known him since he was a first year, and he's a senior now. So it's like it's easy, but I'm like, I've known you for like so long already. Like, I don't know how to just narrow it down to like one page. So I've kind of just been like bothering him, like, give me specific things you want me to write about because I can write like a lot. So I think even then, like, knowing the person like as a friend and kind of separating that for like professionalism and like friendship and like how to write one that speaks like properly about them, that'll get them the job, and not just like, oh, this person's so great, they're my friend. It's kind of a little hard.
So outside of the best practices that Davi shared from her personal experience, I have a list of like tips, best practices, things that you could be aware of as you're writing, and I am going to drop that in the chat. It's a link to Absorb, so you should be able to click through there and read through that PDF. So I want to give you all about 5 minutes to read through this PDF, the best practices, and also Davi's sample letter. And if you could all come back after those 5 minutes and be ready to share out either a tip that you thought was maybe like really helpful, something that you hadn't thought of before, one that you want to highlight, or like something you noticed or another question, be ready to do that so we can have a little bit of conversation. And then we are going to take a little bit of time to practice. So 5 minutes. Alrighty, everyone, it's been about 5 minutes. So I want to pull us back, and I'd love for everyone who's on and who is reading to give voice to one takeaway thing from either Davi's sample letter or from that best practice sheet. And that could be literally just like reading word for word one of the tips on that sheet. But popcorn it maybe? Is there anyone who's willing to start to share out something that they thought was important or helpful from that tip sheet?
I can start.
Thanks, Daniel.
No worries. I feel like for the tip sheet mostly is to make sure the person you're recommending is seen as like an individual, and make sure that you're tying it back to whatever that position is. Something I do is I might even look up whatever position they're talking about, or like ask them what specifically they think connects from our experience to where they're going. So yeah, making them seem like an individual is really helpful.
Nice, thanks.
I popcorn Sharky.
Woo! So I think for me, one tip, not necessarily directly correlated to the sheet, is just hearing everybody else of what they view important and what are some tips and strategies. Because honestly, I'm not confident in writing for another student. I kind of hope I wouldn't be asked, as bad as that sounds. But just hearing kind of what y'all have, I think will ultimately like help me out until it gets to that point where I have to write one for a student, and then after that just being, practicing it, right? So hopefully that first student won't be as mad at me if it's not, as well put as like a professor would do. But due time, I would hope I'll get better the more and more I practice.
Yeah, and I don't think that a student who's asking for a letter from you is expecting like this beautiful, perfect prose, right? I think they're asking you because, oh, be quiet. I think they're asking you because you know them, right? And that they know that like you'll be genuine and that you can speak to like what's good about them. And I think whether or not you're super confident in your writing skills, you are super well equipped to do that for a student that you're talking to.
Thank you, Grace.
I
Appreciate
really mean it. But also we'll be practicing a little bit.
Parkour Marcella.
Feel free to throw it in the chat if you don't want to jump on the mic.
I was gonna say you might want to choose another one. Marcella not here. A student came in.
Oh, okay, cool. That's fine. Let's see. Niat wrote one in the chat. Explain how the student is unique and a great candidate. Yep, and I think that's very similar to what you shared, Daniel, of speaking to how they're like an individual. And Alex is on the phone. Let's see. Okay, thanks, Anahita. Let's see, Alana or Kersha. You both have cameras on. Is there something you could share? Cool. And then Allison next.
I think it's really important to highlight like why our position is unique compared to like a professor or another staff member. So I like how Davi did that in her recommendation letter, and just make it clear that like we know the student in a way that other people in their life might not know them. And that can be really valuable, and like maybe we'll help them get an internship or scholarship.
Yeah, one thing that I sort of noticed. Oh, sorry, Kirsha, were you about to go, or I just saw the chat? Oh, okay. One thing that I saw on the best practices that I hadn't really thought of was making sure that you're not accidentally presenting your student as perfect. I think I definitely have, even like when I'm not writing letters of recommendation, but just giving verbal recommendations to people, I do think that I have a tendency to like only focus on the positives, and I think that that can sometimes come across as like overhyping someone or something. And so like sort of just having that like pointed out explicitly was like, oh, I should maybe go back over that letter and make sure that I'm not, you know, painting out my student to be the most amazing person in the world, because I think that she is, but you know, everybody's human.
I can go. I honestly didn't think that saying I recommend this student was so important. I mean, I assume that if I'm writing a letter of recommendation, then obviously I'm recommending them. But you know, that definitely shocked me to say that I recommend this student. So I'm definitely going to make sure that I keep that in mind if I end up writing one.
Yeah, Denisha, I had that takeaway too when I read this for the first time. But I think that it's important to say that explicitly because of potentially some situations like Davi brought up of a student asking her that maybe she wouldn't recommend for that position for some reason, and that potentially some people who are reading letters of rec for like an internship or a scholarship or something are reading ones that seem kind of wishy-washy, or like the person might not actually truly recommend them. And so calling out super explicitly like I am recommending this person can take away any of that like ambiguity that they might feel. Anyone else want to share any takeaways or surprises? Okay, if not, I would like you all to spend a couple minutes helping each other out in practicing writing some letters. So in the chat, I am dropping a Google Doc. And this Google Doc has some like sentence starters that are separated into those components of a letter that the best practices shared. So it breaks it up into, I think, 4 different components of a letter. And I would love for you all to think of a student, like one student in particular, that you want to sort of practice writing a letter for. So that could be a student that you know you're going to have to write one for. It could be a student that you know really well and you feel confident in writing one for. Or if you want to challenge yourself, potentially practicing writing a letter for someone that you don't know super well, based on either notes you have in Salesforce or based on like data that you have access to. So if you click through into the Google Doc, we have these different sentence starters based on it is 5 components of a letter that tip sheet recommended. So first step, pick a student that you want to write for. And second step, fill in or add at least 2 bullet points. So you don't have to finish each of these sentences, but pick 2 of them, at least to start with, and finish these sentences. So is that clear? Any questions? Okay, so once you pick your student, have at it. Again, fill in 2 of, or finish 2 of these sentences.
Like on the Google Doc itself or on a separate one? Okay, got
Yep,
it.
right into the Google Doc. And then ideally, after everyone adds some sentences, you all can come back to this if it's helpful and steal each other's sentences, or at least these sentence starters if you need help sort of pre-writing or getting going on a letter. Okay, it looks like the typing is slowing down, but I think we filled in, or I think we finished every single sentence at least once. So thank you for practicing and for sharing your beautiful words. I will leave this live for the rest of today, and then I'll download it and add it to Absorb. So as you are writing letters of rec, you can reference this and steal each other's sentences, and then personalize it a little bit for the specific student that you're writing about. So I want to open it up quickly to any questions, comments, concerns you have about writing letters of recommendation for your students. Okay, so I want to finish up our conversation by talking about that second component that I introduced at the beginning of helping empower our students to ask for letters of recommendation from people and doing that well. So I guess there's two different parts to that conversation. Is first, let's talk about like etiquette in terms of asking for a letter of recommendation. So from your experience, I assume that everyone here has asked for a letter of recommendation at least once. So what are some best practices? What are some things that you should do when you're asking for a letter? And go ahead and let's just put that in the chat for now. So an example might be that when you're asking, you should share with the person that you are asking your resume or some specific information about yourself that might help them write the letter. So that might be a best practice. What are some other things that you should do when you're asking for a letter?
Are you talking or typing it?
Either, but feel free to asking the question in the chat now. So that might be quicker. I'd love for everyone who's on to share a response. It's okay if we have doubles.
Well, I was thinking that it'll be important to share about the position that you're trying to get, just so the person writing the letter can understand what they're relating you to.
Good one. And then Allison said basically the same thing, but added and also why you want it, which is good. Good. So Alana said, give probably a month in advance for the recommender. So that's a big one of encouraging your students to ask well in advance. Let the person know the deadline. Remember to give them plenty of time to write it. Good. Ask students about their relevant experience to the job they're applying for, or ask for their resume. Share what they know about you. Good. Make sure the person knows something about the job, internship, volunteer opportunity. Good. So sharing a link specifically to what you're applying for so they can read more about it is a good idea. And then, yeah, Anahita shared something that I think Davi asked for of her students earlier too, of sitting down with whoever is recommending to learn a little bit about why they're interested in whatever the opportunity is. Good. So scheduling a sort of interview time to better understand so you have the information you need to put in that letter. Why the recommender should focus or what the recommender should focus or highlight. Good. So calling out specifically what the student is good at or has experience in that would make them a good candidate for whatever that opportunity is. Cool. So we have both sort of logistical things, what you should share, how you should share it, how far in advance you should ask. It can be a good idea to ask in person and then follow up with an email that has all that specific information. That's the best practice that you could share with students. And then shifting to the second part of that question then, How can you all help your students feel more comfortable or empowered to ask for letters of recommendation? And I might ask specifically Sharky or Denisha, who were both over on that 5 end of the scale of feeling confident when you were in undergrad and asking for letters. So like, why were you confident? What made you confident or helped you feel empowered to ask people for letters?
So I can actually start. Hey, how are you? Sorry, I was talking. I actually, so my support system and the people that I connected with in high school always said, let me know if you need a letter of recommendation. And they always ask just randomly, do you need a letter of recommendation? I'm like, no, but I know who I can come to if I do. So really, people just threw themselves at me and let me know that it was okay for me to ask if I needed one. So that's what made it so easy.
Thank you.
I would say just for me, it's just it was the practice of it. So like one thing, just something I just always noticed about when I was in life, just anytime, like anything, any situation where it's like somebody's asked to volunteer or something like that, like I would always be the type to shy away from it, and like most people would do that. So after a while, I got to a point like at least when I came up, like people would get called out. So like to avoid that, I will always volunteer. I always be like, okay, I'll go, or just do it because I always be like, let me just get it out the way. So just after doing it so long, I've just been so comfortable being like, okay, I just need to just go out and do it. So like when I see it on an application or something that's like you need a letter of recommendation, like you can't escape it. So you might as well get comfortable with doing it. So just go ahead and do it.
Nice. I'm hearing some really good advice from both of those experiences. So one, normalizing the experience, telling your students like, everybody has to ask for a letter for something at some point. And when you go ask your professor or your supervisor or me, like it doesn't feel like a burden because that's something that everyone does at some point. And then also helping them practice. So Sharky's saying that the more he did it, the more comfortable he felt. And that's something that you can help your students do. So if you feel like if they express that they're uncomfortable asking for letters, that they feel like a bother, or they feel uncomfortable doing that, especially in a situation where there's a power dynamic, there usually is with someone who you're asking for a letter from. Walk through it. So role play with them, have them go through and actually say to you what they might say to someone else so that they can get that practice in a safer space with someone that maybe they're more comfortable with than whoever they're actually going to go ask from. Any other questions or thoughts on this idea of helping students feel more comfortable asking for letters? Alrighty, then I am going to wrap up our session today with a few housekeeping items. So number one, next week, the College Possible offices will be closed Thursday and Friday for the Thanksgiving holiday. And we want to extend a gift to all of you. We are going to cancel Ducks for next week. So no need to jump on Zoom next Tuesday. Use that time to do whatever you think you need to do, but no need to be with us on Tuesday morning. And sort of tangentially to that, if you all read the weekly update email this week, which I hope you did, please read those. The headline called out that there are 3 weeks left in the fall campaign, which was shocking to me when I realized that a couple days ago, but hopefully that was on your radar if it wasn't on mine. Real quick, I am screen sharing the program management calendar. This is linked every week in the update email towards the bottom in that like helpful link section. So November 13th is where we're at now right here. By this Friday, the benchmark is that 65% of your students will have any methods outreach met, and that 55% of your students will be in either category 1 or category 2 for persistence categories. And if you look 2 blocks down from there, November 30th is the last day of the fall campaign, which means that we will be at, or hopefully be at these 2 goals. So 90% of your enrolled students with campaign coaching sessions, that doesn't have to be voice to voice, but ideally your voice to voice is going to be pretty close to that 90% because you have the benefit of being on campus and close to your students. That if you have some students that you're texting or emailing with to get those campaign coaching sessions, that's fine, but you should be pretty close to that 90% in your voice to voice. And then that second tracked goal, that 75% of your enrolled students are in persistence category 1 or 2 by November 30th. So if you're feeling like you're not going to be at those goals for whatever reason, we know there's a lot of different factors that go into potentially not being able to meet those. Talk to your supervisor, walk through a plan with them for how you can meet those goals by the end of the month. If you're feeling like you need some additional support, reach out to Sam or Devin, whoever your program advisor is, and they can help you create an action plan for getting close to those goals if you're feeling like you might not meet those today. But please spend some intentional time thinking about these goals and where you are in relation to them right now, knowing that you have 3 weeks left to get to as many students as possible. Any questions on campaign things? Alrighty, well, we will not see you next week. So I hope you all have a nice, ideally long weekend. I assume everyone has a long weekend next week. Hopefully you get to see some family, have a nice time for yourselves, and we will see you back the week after that. But we will be here, so reach out, email, Slack, whatever. You know how to get a hold of us. Well, have a good rest of your week. Bye, y'all.